Welcome, listeners of Illusion to Temporal Discussion, the episode-by-episode retrospective podcast on everybody's favourite kids' TV show, Nightmare. I'm Martin Harder, better, faster, stronger.
And I'm Martin O'Doney, weaker, slower, well, just weaker.
And I'm Dave, harder, better, Bulmer. You see, mine fits that anyway.
It does, doesn't it? I feel ashamed now.
So, yes, as you probably guessed, we actually have a special guest with us today, star of Sonic the Comic, the podcast, and Serious Business, and various other things, Dave Bulmer.
Hello there.
So, Dave, tell us what Nightmare means to you.
Oh, so much. I can't promise, but I think that I was watching from the start. I don't remember it, starting. I don't remember there being any fanfare about it coming on, but, I recognise the very early episodes, and yes, I don't think there was ever a time when I didn't watch Nightmare. There was a time when I thought it had jumped the shark a bit, but I definitely don't think there was a time when I wasn't watching it. I mean, I remember very keenly standing around, I remember exactly where, just outside the fire exit to our classroom. We weren't really supposed to stand around out there, but there was one of those, you know how the fire exits to classrooms, you had steps leading up to them, and you had the little bit of corner banister, so you would sit on that. It'd be a nice little seat. We were all standing around there and sitting around and discussing, we need to go on Nightmare. We need to send in, this would have been about 1992 or 3. We need to send in and go on this thing. And of course, we didn't realise then that I don't think that's how it worked. I think they came to schools and said, pick some well-behaved children.
No, I don't think so, no.
So you could just write in.
There was adverts at the end of each season.
Oh, right.
It's possible that they did that for the first
For the
series,
first
maybe.
season, yeah. I'll have heard that from someone who was in the first series, I bet.
We had something better than a fire escape at our school. We had an air raid shelter.
What? Wow.
Sitting on top of the air raid shelter.
On top of, so was it it was mostly an underground bunker, but with a little bit of roof so you could get up there, or what?
It was just basically a big mound of earth with a wooden door in it, kind of at an angle. And
Wait a minute. We had a big artificial mound of earth. I wonder if that was once an air raid. There was no door in it, though. I always assumed it, at first I thought it was a natural hill, but then I assumed it was just when they excavated the playground, that was just where they dumped it and put some turf on top or something.
I should mention that the school I went to didn't have a big mound of earth. It had a tree. Over to you lot.
But was there anything cool about the tree? For example, we had a big tree on the infants' playground that had big gnarly roots, so we could play a game called Round the Roots, where we were only allowed to walk on those, and the floor was lava and crocodiles.
You had a tree as well, so you had a mound of earth and a tree. Yes. And I had just a tree.
I'm afraid so. Yeah, we were an embarrassment of riches. Yeah, and we had another tree.
You had 2 trees. This is unfair.
We had loads of trees. Fair. There was trees lining the mound of earth. It was like a big hill. Yeah, it would used to drop these little... What are they? I don't know what these are. They're like a kind of nut. Imagine a round acorn with a hairy cup. It used to drop these, and we would collect them. And if you got a big one, it was called a whopper. Hi, let's do a podcast. Sorry.
So, anyway, we had a tree. And now I feel like I had a very, very neglected childhood, thanks to this.
I'm imagining a very bleak sort of building with just a single tree and a kind of graveyard sort of mist flowing around, and that's it. Nothing else for miles around.
Yeah, that's just about it, actually, really, yeah. That was pretty much my childhood.
Before we go any further, I should apologise that I did bring some snacks.
What a good idea. Yes, let's get the old pastels out. I got my pastels, here they are right now. I got my pastels, here they are right now. I got my pastels, here they are right now. I got my pastels, here they are right now. This is a in-joke about me, listeners, if you don't know me.
I should point out once again, I'm the unlucky one because I haven't got any fruit pastels either. I've got a cup of coffee.
No, you haven't got a hill or a pastel.
And it's caramel flavoured coffee as well.
Listeners, you probably won't know this, but I am looking at both of these guys with Nightmare backgrounds. They've got that green screeny effect on where they're in front of Nightmare backgrounds. And Martin Harder, you're in front of a corridor. Well, you're in a room. And either side of you, there are 4 doors. Is that the room that the pole spike things will come out?
No, this is the great corridor of the catacomb.
And Martin O'Doney, I think you are the skull whose eyes come out, yes? Are you on the background for the life force?
It's the same background that they use, but it's actually the animation you get when the Dungeoneer is between rooms. They use the same animation as the red stage of the life force clock for that.
Do they really?
Well, in the first 2 seasons, yeah.
But you're also wearing a top, which apart from the Nightmare logo, has been edited out by your app. So you are just a floating head.
You can see Nightmare quite clearly there, can't you? Let's be honest.
Yeah, it says the logo there. Oh, I forgot. I totally forgot when I was telling you what my connection to Nightmare was. I forgot the most important bit.
Tell us the most important bit, David.
Nightmare taught me the word possess, and I can remember the day it taught me it, because when I was at school, I was bad at school. Like, I wasn't bad in the sense of being a bad boy at school, being a ruffian or anything, but I was just bad at it. I wasn't very good at school. And it got to the point where, presumably, someone, be it my teacher, who was really horrible that year, interestingly, I did quite well at school other years when I didn't have a horrible teacher, or whether it was my parents or whatever, but somebody along the way figured out that I was bad at something, and, like, this woman would come in. I don't want to say private tutor, because I don't think she was hired by my parents or anything, but some helper or other, would come in, pull me out of the class, and try and get me to do some work. And I've never found out why this was. Maybe I was really bad one year, and I just don't remember it. But anyway, this woman got cross with me because I really wasn't listening to her, because I was way too interested in my Nightmare book. And this was the Labyrinth of Fear, I believe it was called.
It has that on the cover. If it has that
exactly,
on the cover,
that's what reminded me. Yes, you're wearing the cover of Labyrinth of Fear.
For a clearer picture, it has that on the cover.
Oh, no. Oh, wow. Harder's got a Helm of Justice tattoo. Wow, that's a really cool tattoo to get, actually. Sorry about the sounds of me eating a pastel. I'm eating a pastel. And, I was into this book because they could have just done some throwaway tie-in book, but no, they didn't. It was a choose-your-own-adventure game book, but it was like a grown-up one. It was kind of hard to read, and it had new words in it, and it opened on a lengthy sort of section of, like, novel, as it were, or, written prose chapters. And it was just so atmospheric and so good.
It was Dave Morris. He took it very seriously when he wrote the Nightmare novellas, and it can look really awesome when you first buy it. There's a temptation to skip over the novel bit.
Yes.
Just go straight to the game book sections at the end. But if you actually look at them in the cold light of day now, they're actually quite short stories. The Labyrinth of Fear is particularly short. It's only about 80 pages.
Right.
There's a couple of them that go over 100 pages, but the truth is, in adulthood, you could probably read the entire story in a Nightmare novella in one sitting. But it looks awesome when you're a kid. It looks quite daunting.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I didn't read the stories when I got the books. I just went straight to the game book.
I think I did at first.
Which unfortunately meant that certain stages in the game, I was absolutely...
You see, I never finished it, but I didn't know that was why. I just thought it was grown up. I thought it was above my level, and that was good. That was what I wanted, because that means you're being treated like a grown up. And I just remember it being... And anyway, there's this one bit where I seem to remember you might be abseiling down a well or something, but it says something, either there's a call to use a bone, and it says, if you possess a bone, then turn to page whatever. And I remember having to ask this teacher what possess meant, so I've always remembered that.
Today we're looking at Series 1, Episode 5, originally broadcast on October the 5th, 1987. Mars is still number 1 with Pop Up the Volume, and The Untouchables is still living up to its name at the box office. Dave,
hello.
Have you seen The Untouchables?
I don't believe I have. No. Why do you ask?
Okay, we've got to set up a poll on Twitter asking if any Nightmare fan ever has watched The Untouchables, because we can't find anybody.
This is going to become a running joke now. Every time we have a guest on, no matter what is the number 1 movie at the time, we have to ask them if they've seen The Untouchables.
Yeah. I've never seen The Untouchables. I don't even know what it is.
We got to the point last time that we got so fed up with just saying that we haven't seen The Untouchables, we started talking about Full Metal Jacket instead.
Right. So is The Untouchables, was this a long-running number 1 at the box office situation? And
been the last few weeks, hasn't it?
Has.
God, 1987. I can't believe it was that long ago. I would have said like 1990 or something.
1987 isn't far from 1990, but yeah.
Well, it's not, to be fair. But when you're that age, it is.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, basically, what this means is that I was right at the very start of school, and I wasn't aware of that.
I was just starting in high school when Nightmare began.
I was 4, and I have memories of the first episode.
That's impressive.
Really? Oh, hey. I was 4, and I have memories of the first time Tim Curry sang Anything Can Happen on Halloween.
It's better than a video.
I remember that airing. I remember sitting in front of the TV. I remember being completely blown away by the best special effects I'd ever seen in my life. And I'm so happy it's become an internet meme in my old age.
Oh, you're eating fruit pastels again.
I got my pastels. Here they are right now.
And since we don't have anything else to say about The Untouchables, let's crack on with the show.
Now, time turns, the fire burns, time out is gone. The quest is on. Team, this is a level 2 guard. Excessively vulgar and potentially deadly if you don't deal with him properly. Despite his hostility, he could help you if you've wit enough to convert him to your cause.
And so we rejoin the team at the beginning of level 2. As Cedric approaches, Danny Treguard reminds the team and the rest of us that he must call I challenge. Cedric accepts the challenge and proceeds to pose Danny and team 3 riddles.
I was very pleasantly surprised that I would have had a lot of trouble with some of these riddles. Like, they're not just, oh, here's 2 things, what colour's this one, or whatever. You'd expect a lot of kids' TV to just make it really obvious, or you can look around the room and find the answer. But no, a lot of them are just actual, general knowledge questions.
I think today you'd expect children's programmes to dumb down. Back then, they didn't. You've actually go back and watch a lot of kids' TV that was made in the 1980s. Some of it was surprisingly rough.
Yeah, I definitely remember knowing that I could never go on any such programme.
Did you see a drama series on BBC called Moondial?
Yes, but I don't remember it.
The main character is a girl called Minty. There's a scene early on when she finds out her family have been taken into hospital and she starts having hysterics, and her aunt steps up to her and slaps her full across the face. Really gives her everything. And you're just thinking, bloody hell, they wouldn't do that today. They were really trying to educate. They were really trying to find the boundaries and to push at them back then. They don't do that now.
Yes, I remember in this episode there's a bit, and I'll say it when we get there, but there's a bit where someone says a word to the kids, and they're just expected to know what it means. It's like a grown-up word. We'll get there.
Anyway, looking at Lawrence Werber, he's really getting into this, isn't he? I think he likes Cedric. I think he wants to play him for the rest of his career.
How much of it do you think is actually scripted and how much is improvised? Because I imagine with Lawrence Werber, there's an amount of it that is actually just him borderline swearing at children.
They must have been ready to improvise, because they would never have known what the kids were going to say. You can tell they were all primed with a couple of responses to certain things.
What they had to say was structured, but they had to...
If this, then that.
Exactly, but they had to basically try and drive the conversation in a particular direction. So you'd have to say it's about 70% improvised. At the start of the riddle contest, they have to give you a standard spiel, but once that's out of the way, they have to contrive things to say to drive the story in the plot's direction.
Yeah, the only exception being that a lot of Folly had to be scripted because it all rhymes.
He doesn't talk in rhymes as much as you might think.
Oh, then that's how we can tell what's improv and what's not.
I guess so.
So the first riddle is, those noble priests that wore this holy cloth were not allowed by oath to shed your blood. Instead, a club they used to crush and maim. This weapon, I would know its name.
Did you notice the rather unsettling laugh when he said maim?
No, but I did notice that initially when they said challenge and he screamed, challenge accepted, you can just hear one of the kids go, oh, God.
Yes.
Is that a reaction to overacting, or was it genuine fear?
Genuinely don't know which it was.
The best example of that was with Maeve's team a couple of episodes ago when they met with Lilith and shouted out a block of soap, and one of the team goes, it's only a game.
Lawrence Werber is a guy who clearly loves to shout. He loves to let it go. We mentioned a couple of episodes ago that he's actually a dentist these days.
Oh, really?
He still acts occasionally. I recently found on Twitter photographs of him on stage in a play called The Domino Heart. It was from about 6 years ago.
This club they used to crush and maim, this is one of the questions I wouldn't have got, because I've never really associated maces with noble priests, necessarily. I can see how the two could go together in a D&D or something, but It
has to be pointed out, that riddle is actually where one of the characters introduced in Season 4 got his name from. Brother Mace is actually another priest, well, he's a monk, in fact, introduced in the 4th season.
So, apparently the writers of this show just totally associate monks and maces, but I've never heard of it before.
Quite literally. A mace is a form of club.
I guess.
I think it's a reasonable riddle. I'm not saying I necessarily would have got it back then, but I think it's a perfectly reasonable riddle.
It is now that I know everything in... it took this riddle for me to learn that monks used to have a stick to hit people with.
Well, it's like I've said before, any question is easy if you already know the answer.
Monks having a stick to beat people with, I think that was a lesson learned from Viking invasions. The monasteries were a popular target. Originally, the Saxon monks didn't know how to defend them. They started arming themselves just so they could have a fighting chance.
Riddle number 2, then. Fair of face, yet scarcely human. They've magic, yet no evil spells. Green of garb and forest ruling, who are the dwellers of the dales? Now, I wanted them to be more specific. In what? In what? In what? And I think the answer here is in either Lord of the Rings or maybe D&D. I don't know.
I can't quite picture a wall monster nipping down to the local Odeon to catch the latest adventure movie. It would certainly be extremely obvious later in Nightmare when we actually start getting elves. They wouldn't even bother using that riddle because everyone would get the answer right straight away.
This was back when Tim Child was still a little bit obsessed with Arthurian legend rather than Tolkien.
I'd say another answer you could give to that, which would have been imperfectly legitimate, would be orcs.
Well, see, so the true answer to this is elf, and they get that right. But it's very specific. They have magic, yet no evil spells. Okay, well, now we're talking about a specific elf from a particular continuity. I want to see the writing on this one. I want to know the notes. Hey, elves out of what?
I don't think the notes exist anymore, I'm pretty sure. A couple of years ago, Tim Child was having a clear out from his
dungeon
garden sheds and found a load of clue objects from Nightmare.
Oh.
He just gave them to the Nightmare stage show people.
Oh.
If he didn't value those things as mementos, he's not going to value early drafts of the scripts enough to keep them.
And the final riddle is: through centuries the frozen giant crawls. No eye can sense his moving, yet you can tell I've been influenced by Traegard in my life. Yet he scars the very surface of the world. Name this force of nature.
I don't think this riddle is fair. Traegard gives them a pretty big and blatant prompt to get them through it, but you could just as easily give an answer like lava.
Yeah, well, it's the word frozen. I don't think I heard them say frozen when I was watching it, and I was thinking, oh, do they mean like mountains or something?
As a lava, once it's cooled down, it becomes a completely solid object, so you could interpret that as frozen.
But it's glacier, and yeah, sure enough, Traegard leans in and goes like, think about ice or something, doesn't he? Is it ice? He says.
Yeah, I think maybe they realised that it was a bit ambivalent, and then maybe Hugo might put the word in his earpiece or something, saying just give him a bit of a clue.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, and also, see, what I thought it was is that they got the first one wrong, so they were going to be in trouble if they didn't get this one wrong and right, and they were like, this one's less fair than the others, let's give them a hint.
Could be.
Two's the score. Dunface. Stonehead.
Cedric allows Denny to take the food that is on the table and also gives him the anvil spell. Cedric's abuse is something that wouldn't have occurred to people when they're making it at the time, but I think people would be worried about these days. I think Dungeoneer is quite sensitive. Do you think that the name calling from Cedric might have been quite damaging to some Dungeoneers?
I think this comes down to something that you can't help but wonder when you're watching Nightmare. The big question that's always in our heads watching it as adults is, exactly what can everyone see? Like, can the kids in the studio see the overlays? Or, are they just seeing an empty studio with a well in the middle and an actor?
Well, you can actually see that you often get views over the Dungeoneer's shoulders.
Well,
of the
yes,
magic
you do, but this actually kind of feeds into my question, because you do see that, but it looks great. And in those days, if you filmed a screen, it looked awful. So I still wasn't sure whether or not they were just overlaying that on, in post or not. And then there's the question of, how does the Helm of Justice work? They can see down, can't they? They can see their feet and find a table, but they can't see ahead of them. And yeah, you never know how much the kids have been prepped. So for example, every room, they turn up, they go to the end of the screen, the end of the room, and they go through a door, and then they show up somewhere else. So obviously, production shuts down, the kid is led back somewhere else, maybe even allowed to take the helmet off while they reset the room, put the well somewhere else, things like that. And these are the things that come into my head. I've kind of forgotten why I started bringing this up, but a minute ago you were saying, it's when they're being insulted.
Yeah.
I wonder if they've hung out with these actors a little bit beforehand and they've had a go. They've been shouted at.
No, they haven't.
No, we checked that.
Oh, really?
That was something that was discussed on the Nightmare forums on Nightmare.com years and years ago. And, sometimes contestants of the show actually join the Nightmare forum and they've said, no, that didn't happen.
Oh, right. Oh, so you have some of the answers then. So to them, it was a little bit like, so they just went in and got shouted at.
Essentially, what happened was, there was usually a gap of about half an hour between filming one room and filming the next one.
Wow!
All of that for maybe 3 minutes of actual filming time.
Yeah.
But what happened was basically they, between rooms, they were basically shut away in a little waiting room and basically left to twiddle their thumbs while still waiting for the next room to be set up. So they had to be shut away, though, so that they didn't get any prior view of what they were going to be doing. The spontaneity was part of the show for them.
Yeah, they were also kept away from any other teams. There were very strict rules about what you could say if you saw a member of another team. A lot of them broke the rules.
Do you know, you really surprised me. I always assumed that the teams were never in the building on the same day. I always assumed it would happen.
Oh, it had to be, because you got to remember, you don't know when the quest is going to finish. So they've always got to have the next team on standby, because this is TV. There's always a really strict scheduling limit on how much time you can devote to recording. You do not want to mess around with or waste too much filming time. So you always have to have the next team on standby, because the very next chamber could be their last one. You don't want to pick up the phone and say, right, when can you get here?
Yeah.
4 hours time?
That's really interesting.
Whether it's interesting or not, it was a painful reality for the production crew. They'd have loved it if they could just stop for a day or two and wait for the next people to show up, but no.
Where am I now? You're in a large room, Daniel. There's 2 doors and a man standing with a large 2-handed sword.
Ah, so it's you again.
And who should be waiting for them here but Gumboil the Horrid? The team don't seem to recognise him, but he certainly recognises Danny from the itch spell last episode.
You do rather wonder how Gumboil got there so quickly.
I think now we have a unique insight into how this was done, because we've now got Dark Souls, which is the game that, to me, most resembles Nightmare. And in that game, there are always shortcuts. There are always little ways if the player's just good enough. So I think that's what Gumboil has done.
Anyway, this is our first ever view of the Timber Chamber. I just want to mention, I think I find it rather fetching. I like the rather fearsome-looking weapons that are hanging on the far wall here.
To me, it kind of has an Evil Dead cabin feel.
It has to be said, if you do run into anybody in there, he's almost certainly going to be an axe-wielding maniac. Gumboil here, he doesn't get a lot of dignity from his appearances in this quest, does he?
Poor old Gumboil. I really felt bad for him.
Oh, wait until season 2. You'll feel really bad for him. He's another one of those tropey characters. The trope, I think, is called the hapless pursuer. Happens an awful lot in adventure fiction. He's the guy who's always in there trying to stop the hero and always getting humiliated.
Yeah, he's the Javert of the dungeon.
Well, this time I'm ready for you. You used up all your magic, so now it's time for Gumboil's revenge. Oh, no. Not again. I don't believe it.
And then the anvil spell... I thought what it was going to be. They start spell casting and they do an anvil, and I was like, "Oh, what's going to happen here is it's because I haven't watched this since I was a kid, so I can't remember. Is that just an anvil? A big drawn anvil is going to just overlay the actor. It's just going to go down, and the actor will be removed from the screen at the same time. But no, it's like it's attached to someone's mouse, and they just sort of wiggle it down towards his head, and he goes,
how they did it. It's all that's really happened is basically the mouse pointer has been given a new shape.
It's a brush.
There's instances in later episodes where they've actually made mistakes and left the mouse pointer in.
Oh, brilliant!
It does look ridiculously Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote these days. Back in 1987, that was actually quite a good effect.
Well, that's the thing. If anyone's listening to this and watching these who wasn't there, this all looked completely convincing to us back then.
We recognise now that it doesn't, but this for us was really high tech.
There's been over the years, there's been a lot of chat about like, oh, how would they update this for modern times to do it again? And like, there's been a couple of attempts, and it's always, it'll be VR or something. But the answer, to my mind, is really clear, which is that you do it the same because it's brilliant. There's nothing wrong with this. Yeah, it's a bit sort of cack looking, but it's great.
They did a pilot for a remake called Nightmare VR, where the Dungeoneers has a visor that basically gives them a view of what's in the game.
How does that work?
It actually fundamentally altered the relationship between the Dungeoneer and the advisors.
What's the point?
Exactly. The answer to your question, how does that work, is that it didn't.
Because the thing is, like, the original... The reason why that feels like what you should do is because In the original Nightmare, they only had this technology to create the dungeon. And so you're like, well, now we've got loads of technology, and we've got video games, and it's normal, and kids are, like, they have VR headsets and stuff now. So, yeah, it makes sense. That's how you do it.
That's actually another reason not to do it, the fact that everybody's got it.
Exactly.
If they've already got it, they don't need to watch other people playing it, because they can play it themselves.
Exactly. And that's not what Nightmare was. The kid, the Dungeoneer, wasn't playing a game. It was, yeah, they were using like what we'd call graphics to build it up, but it was about a kid who can't see and then the team who can. And like, yeah, no, just do it the same. It's brilliant.
They contrived the gameplay to fit the technology, and in so doing, made that technology work. If you use different technology, that gameplay becomes superfluous. So you're not actually remaking the program.
Here's what I think I would do if I was having to reboot Nightmare, right? It would be, and I haven't thought this through, but the basis of it probably would be VR. But it would be that the whole team is in the room. They're in their VR helmets. They are seeing a VR environment. But the live actors are still there. It's that everyone's in there. Because the main job of the team... Well, no, what I would do is have it exactly the same as Nightmare. But if I was forced to, if they said the mandate is we have to do VR or something... The point of the team is to solve puzzles. They don't need to not be in the dungeon. Once you've got a VR helmet, there's no reason to have just one and one kid be in there. So that's what I think I would do. I think I would put them all in there.
That would still fundamentally undermine the relationship between Dungeoneer and Visors. I still don't think it would come across right.
No, it would be a new game. It would be just... It'd be like a multiplayer game then. Whatever it would be, I would see if Hugo Myatt's still up for it. Because...
Oh, of course.
Without him, there's no point. Didn't the VR one have like a weird CG Hugo Myatt or something?
Well, it had an avatar of him. It was still Hugo providing the voice.
So that's halfway there, but no, just put him on the screen.
That's one of the things they got wrong on Nightmare VR, though, was he wasn't actually the host of it. He was sort of like the mentor giving guidance to the Dungeoneer, but they invented a goblin character of some kind to do the hosting.
No.
Yes, they did.
No.
I know you wish it wasn't true, but they did.
No.
It was wrong. It was evil, but they made a goblin the host of Nightmare.
There are certain elements, such as the slice me, dice me. If they'd done that in original Nightmare, that would have been spectacular.
This spell, N-V-I-L-A. Now walk forward, Daniel. Just keep on walking forward.
The team take offensive action and cast Anvil, causing a floating anvil to appear. It knocks Gumboil out cold before turning on Danny. Unfortunately, the team are able to dispel it on time, and they guide Danny out of the chamber.
Where am I?
Listen very carefully, team. This is obviously a clue room where there be objects of interest. Your life force energy is still healthy. Choose wisely without undue haste.
So we get our second look at the level 2 clue room. The team guide Danny down the stairs in the most awkward-looking way possible. Basically, Danny doesn't use the banister rail at all, which is needlessly dangerous and would probably be illegal under health and safety regulations today. They tell him that he needs to take the stairs at a reasonable speed, and Tragard therefore has to remind them that he said,
without undue haste,
before instructing him to walk straight down the middle, ignoring the banister rail.
Basically, Tragard is just, please don't fall over, please don't fall over, please don't fall over.
We don't literally want to kill kids on this program. No matter what Mary Whitehouse thinks, we actually don't literally kill children yet.
The kid goes all the way down the stairs and face plants, and Hugo has to look at the camera and go, now remember, it's all just make-believe in the dungeon. I must say, there's an interesting cut between when Danny is halfway down the stairs and when he gets to the bottom of the stairs. So I suppose we don't know what antics took place on those last few stairs or how many takes it took.
Retakes were not completely unusual for this team. You won't have heard our podcast yet for the previous episode, but they had to do something like 20 retakes of the intros because one of the kids kept on giggling. And that kid, by the way, is actually the problem advisor in this particular scene. Is he not, Mr. H?
Oh, yes.
Is that the kid in the yellow top at the end? That kid! Now, no offense, that kid, if you're listening. Like, I get it, because I would have been you. Here's my story, right? Primary school, a little bit later than this. They wheel in the blue gurney with the little trolley wheels that's got the school's one computer on it. the BBC Micro for my school. And on this particular occasion, the game, the educational game that certain kids were, I think we were taking it in turns to go out in threes. And we were going to be playing the text adventure of Stig of the Dump. We were all crowded around the computer. I wasn't the one who was allowed on it. I was just standing there watching. And I think it was a girl called Gemma who was actually on the game. And the room comes up. I think you start in your bedroom or something anyway. You're in a room. And it says, some exits are south and east. And I went, put west. And they went, no, it says southeast. And I said, it says some exits are south and east. I'm talking about the secret exits there might be. And the thing is, I meant it. I was like, aha, I've fooled the puzzle. I have fooled your cunning puzzle. But no, I was just being annoying. And I honestly, I wasn't trying to be annoying, but I kept it up until I was borderline removed from, I may have had to go and miss the rest of the game or something. It was like, and that's what this kid's doing. He's overthinking it to the point of ruining everything.
It's a big shame you weren't actually playing the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy text adventure, because there is a bit in that where the computer literally lies to you. It says you can't go that way.
It's the main drive room on board the Heart of Gold. It tells you there's nothing to see here. Nothing happens. And you press look, and you type in look. And it says, I mean it, there's nothing to see here. And then you type look again, and it says, okay, there are one or two things to see here.
Turn right and walk forward. There's a table.
Get round the back of the table.
Okay, get round to the back of the table.
What we got here is an example of why the guy in the yellow shirt, I think his name's Mark, isn't terribly useful. When Danny approaches the table, he finds a bunch of grapes, a fish, a key, and an hourglass. Not an egg timer, by the way. Traeger tells him there's something fishy going on, as there should only be one food item on the table. And lo and behold, it triggers a very long, slow, and completely pointless argument in which Yellow Shirt basically tries to convince everybody over and over not to take the fish item when they've already decided they're not going to take it. He's not listening.
The best part of this entire scene, though, is his quote, though.
How is he going to eat a raw fish?
And they go like, yeah, that's what we're saying. Eat the grapes. He's like, oh yeah. Yeah, because the reason he says that is that they say eat the grapes, and he goes, how's he going to eat a whole raw fish?
Grapes, whole raw fish. It sounds the same, doesn't it?
They come into the room and Traeger tells them their life force is still healthy. By the time they actually put the grapes in the knapsack, they're bordering on red. This is the team that has come closest to starving to death, I think, just because of arguing over a fish.
No, it's worse than that. They're agreeing over a fish, and they're arguing about agreeing over a fish. It's even worse. They don't even need to be having this conversation at all. It's the old joke, isn't it? The fish is just another one of those old jokes. It's very obviously a red herring. The other two advisors pick up on it immediately, but Mark has to show off how clever he is that he's figured out that you can't eat a raw fish. And then, of course, just when you thought the scene couldn't get any better... Hey! Put me down! Guess who turns out to be on the table?
Have we met this individual before?
Yes, I'm afraid we have.
Yes.
It's Casper the Key again.
The talkie toaster of Nightmare, I think.
That talkie toaster can actually be amusing. When he says, don't drop me anywhere dark where I can't be found, every time I stop and think, now that's a decision for the Dungeoneer to make, isn't it? I woke up with a headache this morning, and one of the first things I had to do was watch the episode again to make sure it's fresh in my mind for this. And when you're watching Nightmare with a headache and Casper the Key emerges on the screen, it's a whole different kind of pain.
I do enjoy that in the next room, even Casper the Key starts to get annoyed with this whole thing and is like, Danny.
I think there are worse Dungeoneers than Danny, but Danny and that key are not a wonderful combination.
The team exit the chamber carrying Casper and the...
I can't even bring myself to say it.
Egg timer.
How could you?
This team has some moments of brilliance and some moments where you just want to reach through the screen and slap them. And this is one of those moments, because they're still taking heed of Traeger's advice, which he gave them to walk down the stairs, and they're still making him walk out of the room really slowly.
In that light, you've actually watched that chamber in isolation. Suddenly, the bizarre mistake they make at the end of their quest becomes a lot more easy to predict.
Where am I?
Daniel, you're in a room with 5 arches at the far wall. There is a key lock flashing in the arches. Speak to Casper and ask him if he recognises any of these locks.
Casper, do you recognise any of the locks?
Hey, look, it's the old moving keyhole. I can do this.
So, this moving keyhole thing, what are they supposed to do here? I couldn't figure out what the solution to this is.
It's basically a lucky timing sort of puzzle, really.
Oh, so because what I wondered if it was that all of that talk about, because in the previous room, Tregard kind of, or either him or the key, one of them, pushed them into taking the hourglass. And so I wondered if it was, they were saying, like, it'll be easier with time in hand. I was wondering if they were supposed to use it to, like, freeze time in this room or something so that they could get the key in.
Well, funnily enough, that is something that a team does in Season 3 in the Serpent's Mouth Cavern. Sometimes the hourglass is used to sort of pause time, but not here.
But it probably would have worked.
I think it's basically just a room to make sure that they have taken Casper the key, because in the level 2 clue room, despite the name, you don't actually get hardly any clues what to take. So it's not until they actually pick up Casper that he starts talking. So kind of make sure that they examine the objects properly. So if they had gone without Casper, without picking him up, they basically would have been stuck there or forced to go through an unlocked door.
The disclaimer about moving through a door when it doesn't have a lock, as I said in the previous episode, I think that's deliberately been put in because the makers realise that any door without a lock on it is simply wide open. What's really happening is the mouse pointer is just being pointed at a particular door. They click on it and the lock appears on there. And then they slide it onto another door, click on that, and the lock disappears from the previous door and moves onto that one. Right, we'll have one right over on the left-hand side. Right now we'll have it right over the right-hand side. Now the Dungeoneer has moved all the way to the left.
Well, this is what I'm thinking. So if it's human controlled, then this is nothing but flim-flam, because basically the Dungeoneer just walks up to one and someone decides how long they have to stand there before they're allowed in. Basically,
pretty much. That 5-door chamber keeps on being used all the way through the first 3 seasons. And they come up with much better uses for it later. At times in Season 2, it's sort of like this level 2 version of the 4-door chamber. You usually have symbols on the doors giving you clues what will happen if you go through it. And then in Season 3, a giant's foot keeps appearing and landing on the other side, and you've got to try and time your walk through the door to make sure that you don't get trodden on.
The thing is, he also kind of gets to the right door, but it's too high. So they're like, oh, lift your hand up really high. And I'm just going like, oh, just let him through. Like, what's this for?
Do you notice Lawrence Werber's mistake when that happens? He keeps on saying, you've got to hold it up. You're the key. You've got to hold me up, you should be saying.
Good point.
He's falling out of character there when he says that.
The back and forth routine goes on much longer this time. Danny's life force is getting low, but eventually...
Where am I now? You're in some sort of room, Daniel. There's a large chair in there, and there's books and glasses and things like that on the shelves.
We're back in a Hall of Folly with the same puzzle as last week. The team quickly work out that it's an M and quickly guide Danny to complete the puzzle. This is one point where they actually did quite well. I've said before, I look at this puzzle and I think to myself, that's really easy, but then I forget that he's blindfolded and they have to guide him.
I think the problem I would have if I was an advisor in this chamber back then was it wouldn't have occurred to me to use the instruction tip it. I would be trying to find some really long-winded description saying, I need you to pick it up and then sort of roll it round onto the next side.
Rotate it anti-clockwise.
Yeah. That sort of thing, and I'd do it in a way that would make it ambiguous, and they'd start turning it round horizontally instead, or something.
Yes,
just say tip it, and that's it. That's a good way of
putting it. They did brilliantly on this puzzle. It makes me wonder if it wasn't the first take. Doesn't Bert appear at that point, or is he already there?
He appears when the M forms. Yeah,
I loved him. I thought he was great, Bert the Wizard.
His actual name's Merlin. Have you ever heard of King Arthur? Lancelot? No, but you've heard of Bert. Okay.
Well, yeah, there was it. He did the whole thing where he's like, "Can you guess my real name?" And one of the kids goes, "I think it's probably Merlin," and nobody listens. He's like, "No, I'm Bert." Shut up.
Another scene, he actually says, "Do you know one of my other names?" And they say, "No." And they say, "Yep, that's one of them."
That was great. I thought that was a good bit.
I'm glad you did.
I did. I thought the joke was good. Like, do you know any of my other names? No. Yes, that's one of them. That's a good joke. But it's undermined by the fact that one of the kids goes Merlin and kind of interrupts the back and forth and isn't listened to. So oh well.
Anyway, Bert One of the Nightmare books actually does list off some of his other names, and characters like Herne the Hunter and Gandalf are attributed to being different incarnations of Merlin.
Well, this guy is great at being Merlin.
John Woodnut.
I mean, him and Traegard have been exchanging notes on how to do the voice, haven't they? They've got a very similar act going on.
I don't know. I think Traegard is being very sinister. I think Merlin is doddery.
Is that it? See, I've never found Traegard sinister. Now, watching it now, I'm like, oh, he was supposed to be sinister. I just thought he was lovely. It's like, hey, it's Traegard, the dungeon dad.
In later seasons, they deballed him after the early stages of season 3, so he did come across as a bit of a lovable grandfather figure. And yeah, he does become quite a lot like Merlin after that. But the early days, he's actually pretty nasty.
Merlin is pleased to see that Danny has found his spell timer and states that he hasn't had a properly boiled egg since he lost it.
Did we just call them egg timers in the 80s? Was that just a colloquialism back then? Because it didn't strike me as weird until you brought it up.
When you're a kid, especially back then, you'd see that, and it would look like the objects that your mum's got on top of the fridge that she gets out every time she's doing the eggs. So you call it an egg timer. But the correct name for a very long time beforehand was hourglass. The term egg timer was quite new.
They could have simply hit a nice middle ground by calling it a sand timer, but they don't. Now, for me, it was we didn't have one of those for timing eggs. I think Mum just knew how long to do an egg. No, instead, in our house, I knew it from the Countdown board game. You got a little pink sand plastic one.
On the subject of the Countdown board game,
yeah. Do
you know what the solution to the first of the 9-letter puzzles is?
I don't know.
Nightmares. So it's actually quite fitting. It's quite fitting that you chose to mention that.
Merlin tells Danny that in order to earn some required magic, he must answer, altogether now, 3 riddles!
The first riddle, then. Wings it has, yet not a bird. Scales it has, yet justice does not serve. Hot its breath, yet cold as ice its heart. Name the worm that serves the forces of the dark.
The first of many, 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 many references in Nightmare to dragons.
Yes. One's going to become a main character.
Yeah, I love the way Nightmare always uses the term worm or veum. It makes it very Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah, he just pronounced it as worm, didn't he?
Yeah.
I wanted it to be more like worm. Worm.
The ancient Anglo-Saxon English word is pronounced veum. It's spelt the same way, but the pronunciation evolved down the centuries. But it is veum.
And did the Anglo-Saxons use that for worms as well as dragons?
I don't think they did. I don't think they did.
It's a distinct thing. It's not that we used to think dragons were like big
Have you
worms.
any by chance watched a film called The Lair of the White Worm? It had Hugh Grant in it in 1987.
I know of it. It's based on the legend of the Lambton Dragon, isn't it?
That's right.
Oh, but see, I know the Lambton Dragon from that old Usborne Book of Dragons.
It discusses the relationship between worm and veum.
Right, you see, I was going to watch that, but it was on after The Untouchables, and I didn't want to watch that, so I missed it.
Well, it was at the cinema at the same time as The Untouchables.
Yeah, it was a double feature, yeah.
It is a pretty silly horror flick, but some of the stuff about dragons and worms is actually quite genuinely interesting.
I remember it from the font of all my knowledge as a kid, the Usborne Book of...
The Usborne Book of Dragons, Witches, and whatever the other thing was.
Dragons, Witches, and Giants, I think.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
2 days ago, I was looking up that book online because it turns out it was illustrated by the same guy who used to do all those books with the little hidden duckling in. Do you remember that? The little Find the Duck, little yellow duck that we hid?
Oh, vaguely, yes. They are reproducing a lot of the Usborne books at the moment.
Yes, I think that one was re-released at some point relatively recently.
Might have to get that for my kid, of course.
Of course.
Yes, absolutely.
Certainly, yes. What a nice excuse that must be to have.
Is that your kid with the glasses, the blue headphones, and the beard?
Yes, the bearded child.
Dragons do actually exist in China, although they don't look anything like the sort of big winged fire breathers. They're found on an island called Komodo.
Yes.
Basically, they're just quadrupeds with very familiar-looking heads, and that's maybe where the Chinese legend of the dragon came from.
I saw a decent theory that some area where some dragon myth had come from happened also to be a place where you could go into a cave and just see Triceratops skeletons in the wall or something. And they were like, maybe that's what they were talking about.
The myth of the worm version of the dragon appears to have arrived in Britain some point in the Roman Empire. There was the Roman Empire stretched so far east at one point that it was taking slaves from what is now Russia, and there was a tribe there called the Sarmatians. The Romans, who were very good at turning problems into their own solution, they would take enemy armies from one part of the empire, transplant them to another part, and use them to keep the peace. The Sarmatians were an army that were dragged all the way across Europe to Britain, and one of their great mythical images was a dragon's head, which would appear on a totem they'd carry into battle. And apparently that's where the Welsh get the red dragon on their flag. So I don't know if there's Triceratops bones to be found in caves near the steppes of Russia. You may very well be onto something there.
Riddle number 2 then. It was the noblest knight who broke the table round, because a woman dragged him down. That doesn't scan. To penance and to death he wore a priestly gown. Who was he?
First things first, really bad virtual rhyme klaxon sounds there once again, because as you say, it doesn't rhyme at all, really. Also, misogyny alert.
Yeah.
Trying to blame Guinevere for Lancelot basically being a bit of a randy so-and-so. That's Lancelot's fault. Yes, she joined in, but she's responsible for her actions. She's not responsible for his.
And then the third line is all about this priestly gown, which I confess, again, I don't know this bit of the story. The penance and to death in a priestly gown.
After Lancelot was expelled from the Round Table for infidelity, he chose to become a monk.
I have to say, I'm impressed they got this one, to be honest. At that age.
After the sword in the stern, it's possibly the most famous bit of the Arthurian legend.
Well, that's the thing. I think it doesn't surprise me that given Knight of the Round Table, they went Lancelot. The bit that surprised me is that they knew the bit about the penance and death.
They probably didn't know that bit. They just knew that from the first bit of the riddle.
The third riddle. Waves it does, though sea air seldom breathes. Spells it does, though words it never speaks. Shorter than a staff, and blunter than a sword. With it, and here we wave around the thing that it is, I can conquer knights with just a word.
I was going to say myself, he really gives it away. He's doing that.
Whip. I'm
waves it does.
I'm
hint,
proud
hint,
to say
hint. Nudge, nudge.
That I had guessed this one by the time he started whipping it around, but...
You know now that the description of this episode has to be in which Merlin whips it around.
You dirty, dirty man. I don't know where you get this mindset from.
Says you that sees an innuendo in everything Lilith says.
You don't see me and Dave behaving like that, do you? Dear, it's disgusting.
You have answered all correctly. Already you have defeated fear. Now you have defeated folly. And in return, I gift you 3 spells and 2 warnings.
3 spells? That may be the only time that Merlin ever gave out that many.
Well, hang on. So why did he? What is it contingent on?
A lot of the rules about the way different regular features worked were completely arbitrary early on. At this point, the series was still very experimental. In later seasons, the rules became stricter on how much of a reward you could get from Merlin.
To the point that you basically had to get a perfect score.
In season 3, it got very harsh. If you got even one riddle wrong, you were almost certainly going to losing status straight away.
And they did get all 3 right here, so maybe that's it. 3 spells, 3 questions.
But this is the thing. 3 spells for getting 3 questions right. In season 3, it was 1 spell.
Oh, for getting 3 questions right. Oh, right.
It got a lot stricter, a lot more consistent, I think.
The first spell is a short spell, and it is called Flare. The second is effective and is called Freezer, but it affects only sentient objects. The third spell is High Magic and is called Energy.
As he gives out the spells, this is when Merlin or Bert warns them that later on in the dungeon you're going to see me again, but I'll be in a black cloak this time. I haven't watched that far, but I'm guessing that's what it is, right? That's what Mogdred is, just him dressed evil.
When you say black cloak, it's actually a dress. I'm not quite sure what they were thinking of when they dressed him up.
You'll also have to go pretty far ahead before you do actually see this dress, because he does not appear once in Series 1.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's a shame for that actor. He must have been looking forward to being evil. I suppose, actually, do you know, a dress is a really impractical garb for a wizard, because they never come with pockets, and where's he going to put his wand? I was never quite... I remember as a kid watching this, never knowing if it was... Like, you're talking about they're at the halfway point, and I assume that means that you know the quest well enough to know that this is about halfway through it, yeah?
It's halfway through the dungeon. This bit, yeah.
Yeah. I remember as a kid, it never occurred to me that it would be the same 2 times. I thought they were just coming up with any random stuff each time. I don't even really remember, like, you know, really tuning into the fact that stuff was repeating at all, except to the point where I was like, yeah, this is nightmare-y stuff.
It was quite cleverly disguised to make it look like it was procedurally generated, but it's actually very linear.
And of course, that stuff later on, you pick your quest, the cup, the shield. Did that have any effect at all, or not?
Probably not. It was just there to emphasise the illusion of non-linearity.
Yeah. Well, it worked.
I'm very sure the quests followed the same scripted pattern, because that's what Tim Child says happened.
Oh, well then. Well, why would you do it any other way?
Each level had its own scripted format, and there's no reason to change it just because the quest object happens to be different.
Of course. There'd be so much more work to have all the actors learn 4 possible things when they're only going to do one.
And there were arguments about that. John Woodnutt got really, really fed up at times in the first couple of seasons, because what they did was the entire quest, all 3 levels originally, was scripted, and then the next quest would have all 3 levels scripted. And what they found was the Dungeoneers never actually got far enough to meet Mogdred, and so you kept on learning all of these long arcane speeches and really dramatic dialogue, and then finding that he didn't ever have to perform it. So they changed it so that each level was scripted. So there's a script for the first level 3 of the season. If the first team doesn't get there, team 2, if they get to level 3, will do the first level 3.
Oh, I see. So before that, they were scripting the whole journey through, new each time. Oh, that's a waste of energy on everyone's part.
The wastage was absolutely gigantic.
Why on earth would you do that?
Because it didn't occur to them. Remember what I was saying? It's experimental at this stage. It didn't occur to them just how much writing they were wasting.
I think it would have occurred to the writers who were like, okay, I've got to do this again.
Yeah, well, he found out pretty quickly, and that's why he changed the approach.
When they say, okay, take the egg timer, and he goes, but he said he needs it for his egg. I thought that was fantastic.
That is sweet of him. You're quite right.
Yeah, he needs it, though, for his egg. And Tragon's like, yeah, leave it.
Merlin didn't give them anything in exchange for the egg timer, so screw him.
The team get a perfect score and earn the spells Flare, Freezer, and Energy. And Merlin warns Danny about the elusive Mogdred. Merlin also informs Danny that the level 2 guards are holding a tournament and that he must brave their gauntlet. After Danny leaves, Casper and the egg timer on top of the puzzle, the team guide them out.
Our whole generation has this thing where we think wagon wheels are much smaller now, but the problem is that we're bigger, so of course they would look smaller. Maybe eggs used to be much bigger in the 80s, and so you needed like an egg timer that lasted a whole hour.
Maybe in Nightmare, they eat dragon eggs for breakfast. You get a hell of a lot more protein out of a dragon's egg.
If you can get it, yeah, before the dragon catches it. That makes sense in universe, but it doesn't explain why the boys would call it an egg timer. So they must have been used to big eggs at home. A big egg.
A big egg.
Where am I now?
Warning, Dungeoneer and advisors. Danny must time his progress with care. There should be a safe zone between the spear paths.
So we wind up in the corridor of spears, I believe.
Yes.
And you've put Hall of Spears again, you maniac!
That's because that's what it's
a
called.
Corridor of Spears.
Nightmare.com said Hall of Spears.
Confound.
We have too many corridors in
That's
Nightmare.
true.
We have the corridor of Catacombs, we have the corridor of Blades.
At the same
we can do
time,
about the corridor of Spears.
we're in the corridor of Spears immediately after the Hall of Folly. So, you want immediate variety there. We're never going to settle this argument, aren't we? So we'll just say it's the corridor of Spears. Oh, he's walking off now. He's in a sulk again. The advisors debate using the freeze spell for remembering that it doesn't work on inanimate objects and finally deciding that careful maneuvering and crawling is the best course of action. It's also a fairly obvious, not terribly difficult course of action, really.
No.
It is, in the end, just another timing puzzle.
Yes, and that's not what they do. But I wanted to mention earlier, I said that there was a grown-up word, and we've reached it, because Merlin, when he gives him the freeze spell, he says it only works on sentient objects. That's a word, isn't it? Sentient. Like, we know what it means, but I had to learn it from Star Trek or something. I can't remember when.
I was reading Transformers comics back then, and they used the word sentient all the time in it because you've got living robots. So it didn't
sentient machines.
It didn't bother me. Yeah. So
no, fair enough. But you know what I mean. That's a fairly advanced word to just assume that these kids know, and they don't discuss it among themselves.
Kids TV and kids media wasn't as dumbed down as it is now. So it's
they used to say possess and all sorts of stuff. But when he said that sentient objects, I thought he must mean the key. But that's the last we see of the key, so...
Yeah! Oh, no. We see him again in the sixth.
I don't. I've made a clean break. I don't have to ever see him again if I don't want to.
And I think that's as true today as it was when the day it was first said.
But yes, they realise these spears are not sentient objects. They're not going on and on in whoever's voice that is.
It would be a really, really silly waste of magic anyway. It's just a timing puzzle. It's very obvious from how far apart the two spears at the front go.
Oh, they have such a long debate about how many steps he's got to take.
It's still easy to position the Dungeoneer pretty much directly in front of the spear path, because as long as he's level with the sides of the door, as soon as the spears are furthest apart, he just moves forward. He's going to be through them with loads of time to spare. There's no need to waste magic to solve this.
And all it is, if you haven't watched an episode of Nightmare but you're just listening to this, is it's just some 3-frame spears coming in from doors, and he's just got to get through 2 layers of that to the door at the back. And they don't figure that out. They figure it out with the first layer.
They take way, way too long just to get started. And you think, after everything they've done so far, why are they getting so incredibly strung up about this? It really isn't much of a puzzle. It's just straightforward. Move forward, stop, wait for the spears to get out of the way. Move forward, stop, wait for these spears to move out of the way. Okay, move forward. There, you're out of the room. That's all it is.
Yeah. The second spears are harder because they're faster, but...
No, they're not.
Well, that's the thing. Because they don't meet in the middle, do they?
No, they don't cross. It's actually easier. You don't really need to stop for the second ones. You could actually, as long as you're moving roughly down the middle, you can just keep going.
But I must admit, if I was playing this, and either if I was one of the kids playing the game, or if this was just a computer game I was playing at home, I would be thinking to myself, yeah, they don't cross, but is that just the animation? Do I still get killed if I go at the wrong time?
I don't think you do, no. You actually look here, because they use this really weirdly over-elaborate way of crouching down and going underneath the single spear on one side. They actually move into the path of it. And when they get Danny to stand up, he's still directly in the path of that spear.
I was sure he was going to die then.
I think they got away with getting skewered there, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, no, I think so.
But they still were allowed to walk out and got away with it.
Well, and because you in this room, you already have established that there is a live team behind the scenes deciding things about how the game goes, because they're taking so long that the little head with its skin coming off and then its eyeballs flying out comes up. And I never realised this when I was a kid. I thought that there was a running timer in each dangerous room, and now and then, when you got to, like, the danger zone, they would bring that head up. No, they're just bringing it up as a way of saying, get on with it.
Yeah, that is... This is something we discussed in a previous podcast. It's not actually fundamental to the gameplay, the Life Force clock. It isn't. It's purely because teams tended to be a bit slow, and in later years, they found better ways of doing it. In later seasons, they'd introduced goblin hunting parties. They'd also have computer-generated ghosts appearing on the screen, chasing them.
Oh, cool.
Moving on. I just want to say, when I sent the script to Dave, he was quite surprised that we used a script. This is us with a script. Can you imagine what it would be like without it?
Where am I now? Right, Daniel, we're in a square room. There's 4 doors leading out. 2 in front of you with great big locks in. 1 to the left and 1 to the right.
Soon after Danny enters, he is followed by Folly.
Oh.
Did Folly go through the Hall of Spears? That's what I want to know, because I seriously would have loved to have seen that.
I'd love to watch just an episode of him trying to get through the buzzsaw chambers and all that stuff.
I'm sure he did, and I'm sure he didn't find it anything like as difficult as Daniel did. He can actually see the spears.
And he's got extra dangly bits as well to get caught on them.
Ha ha! Dangly parts.
But he was fine. Oh, gosh, Folly. I imagine you have to watch Folly a lot more than I had to. Hee 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 hee. Riddle me ree.
Oh!
Folly, after a while, makes you start wishing you had Casper back.
He does. Whenever there's a I have to rhyme character, here are my riddles 3. I don't blame the guy playing him. Like, there's nothing that you could do.
Alec Westwood is a terrific actor.
I've just looked him up. He's got an interesting career, which is that he's like in stuff now and then suddenly he's in loads of stuff really recently. Like, he's in loads of stuff in the last sort of 3 years, and that's fully half of his resume.
He's putting up adverts for his TV and stage work on Instagram all the time. So we have another new chamber. Actually, it isn't a new chamber. I'll come to the reason why in a second. Soon after Danny enters, he's followed in by Folly. Now, it's not a new chamber, Mr. Harder. Shame on you. You should recognise it because it's actually the very same chamber the catacomb bite normally lurks in.
It was a very dark chamber when the catacomb bite was in there, and also we were concentrating on the monster itself because that thing was bloody terrifying.
Everybody's got a good reason not to remember that is actually the same room. It gets used for a number of different things, in fact. So I think Folly once again deserves rather more manners than he gets from the team here, because for the second time in the quest, he gives them a free clue to figure out what direction to go in. And the worst thing about it is this is where they make the big mistake, which destroys all of their progress, because the clue is bloody easy. Would you like to read it out to us, David?
Sure. The clue is, says the right hand to the left hand, I don't know the way. Says the left hand to the right hand, I'm in disarray. Very well, quoth the right hand, then I'll have the say.
I can't believe anybody can't work out what that clue means.
So you got 2 doors, and the left hand is in disarray, and the right hand is like, this is fine, I'm fine. So it sounds as if they're supposed to go through the right hand door.
What a revelation, good sir.
Yeah, I used all my brain power on that.
My feeling at the time was almost, it's too obvious. It must be a trick clue, because it just sounded too easy. It's so painfully obvious which direction you have to go from that.
This is fascinating to me. I thought that I'd come on this podcast and you were watching Nightmare through, kind of like, you know, like I am with Sonic or the Games Master podcast guys over there. But you guys know this series like back to front. You've been spending years on forums discussing these episodes. I had no idea people did that with Nightmare because, to my mind, it would sort of spoil it.
But that's true with any TV series if you think about it, though, isn't it?
The team asks Folly to repeat the riddle, but before he can...
Warning team, a complete temporal disruption approaching. Time is now the enemy. Oh dear, a temporal disruption complete.
And that's that for this episode of Nightmare. And I guess that's that for this episode of Temporal Discussion.
No, it isn't.
Is it not?
No, we haven't discussed Nightmare Castle yet. We were going to do that, remember?
Nightmare what?
The history of Nightmare Castle can be found in the original Nightmare novella. Can you beat the challenge? The history is that the castle is right on the Scottish border, North Cumbria, on a gigantic ancient crag, which looks nothing like the hill in the title sequence, by the way. It was set up as a border defence against Scottish marauders. Its original name is Duns Helm. There was a settlement very nearby to it, a village called Duns Holm, and the population were protected from marauders by the North Guard, which was the name of the Saxon border patrol that operated from the castle.
Can I just say the amount of lore that is put into this for what is ostensibly a game show?
It's impressive, but probably excessive as well.
Presumably, the people making the show wouldn't have come up with this. This would have been just for the book, would it?
According to Tim Child, he did have a lot of input.
I suppose he would have done, because he would have been in charge of it, yeah.
What he said of the novellas was that it was very much in keeping with the character of the programme, but differed in the detail. So there was a lot of licence given to the author, but the broad thrust of it was Tim Child's own ideas. For some generations, the North Guard headed by the Baron of Dunshelm, protected the north of England. The real reason they were doing it was actually the Normans, as kings of England, wanted Saxon military power pointed north against the Scots, so there would be fewer rebellions against Norman rule. What happens is, near the end of the 12th century, there's no need to do this anymore because England has become properly pacified. And so the Normans basically abandon Dunshelm, and it becomes an easy target for robber barons and the likes. And a Norman baron called Vestan actually steals the castle and slaughters all of its inhabitants, including the barons of Dunshelm. The only survivor of the attack is the youngest son of the Baron of Dunshelm, and his name is Treguard. And Treguard flees England to the continent and lives a life as a mercenary for 10 years. When he comes back to England, he finds out that the castle has been taken over in turn by a sorcerer called the Gruagach. The Gruagach actually changes the castle. According to Merlin in the novella, if Camelot is the ideal fortress, Dunshelm has been turned into its opposite, and he renames it Nightmare Castle. And the idea that the Gruagach has is he will present it as a challenge to virtuous warriors. He will send them into the dungeon to see if they can master it. And of course, they all get killed because it's way more powerful than anything they can deal with. And by doing that, he basically lures all the good people in England to their deaths. And so England becomes a more evil place. And so that is why Dunshelm has become Nightmare Castle, and why the dungeon is a magical place. What happens at the end of the story is that Treguard successfully quests through the dungeon with Folly at his side, confronts the Gruagach and slays him, and that means he's mastered the dungeon, and so he is now the dungeon master of Nightmare Castle, and he has reclaimed his birthright. He decides to keep the challenge going as a way of testing the mettle of English warriors, but he also uses the magic of the dungeon so that when these prospective knights are killed, they now come back to life, and hopefully they'll have learned something from their quests.
So the whole thing is like a morality lesson then. Treguard is basically Willy Wonka.
Yes, there is some resemblance, isn't there? Annie on the Nightmare forums says that she's always seen that similarity. The chocolate factory and the dungeon do have an awful lot of similarities. You can only take it so far. As far as I know, Willy Wonka did not take over the chocolate factory from an ancient sorcerer.
Far as you know. I reckon that makes a lot of sense.
It would actually explain something about the chocolate factory if you think about it. For some reason, Nightmare Castle isn't referred to as Nightmare Castle in the first season. It's referred to as the Castle of Confusion.
Oh, I just thought that was a description of the sort of castle it was.
Yeah.
I think I'm happy to have in headcanon that it was always called Nightmare Castle.
Yeah, it's interesting that he doesn't name it.
I must admit, I'm surprised that you're calling it Nightmare Castle, because I always thought it was called Dunshelm, and I guess that's because of the book that I had.
Dunshelm gets mentioned a few times in the TV series.
Oh, does it?
The first time the term Dunshelm is actually used in dialogue is actually in season 3. Belda, the elf maid, is having a conversation with Treguard, and she actually calls him Treguard of Dunshelm.
Yes, that actually, you're right there. That's what I'm thinking of. It wasn't that I thought the castle was called Dunshelm. It was that I thought he was Treguard of Dunshelm, and if that happens to be where he lives right now, then fair be it. Before we sign off, let me tell you one more thing, because I've remembered something that I didn't tell you at the beginning that you might like to know, which is that I remember a day when a lot of the kids on our playground all got together to play Nightmare. And the way that we did it was that we had a big A-frame, which was, I don't know what this was really supposed to be, or if it was really supposed to be this, but imagine it just like several planks of wood going up, and just an A-frame, it just goes down again on the other side with no planks of wood. So you can climb all the way to the top, and you can sit on the top, and you are just in danger then. There's nothing safety-wise at all. There was nothing to catch you if you fell off. I'm sure it was immediately dismantled as soon as I left the school and any kind of standards or rules for safety came in. There wasn't even... There was like, bark at the bottom to keep you roughly safe, but then they got rid of that and replaced it with this sort of rubbery stuff. So... extremely dangerous, but you would climb up this frame and you would just sit along the top of it, and the bravest kids could dangle their feet and not even, hold on. The rest of us would just sort of lean with our elbows and be still stood on the ladder, and we would peer over and just watch whatever was happening on the other side. And on this occasion, what was happening on the other side was Nightmare, and we were all shouting down, a walk forwards, and there was someone who would just have like a jumper on their head so they couldn't see, and other kids would come in and go like, I'm a goblin, so solve my riddle. And I'm pretty sure this, probably only went on for a few minutes before we realised we hadn't done any of the prep necessary. Nobody had any riddles. We didn't know what we were doing at all. We're just shouting at a kid who was walking around with a jumper on their head, really.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it works in most playgrounds, actually, when people play Nightmare. Picking up riddles actually required quite a bit of lateral thinking that we weren't really ready for.
I don't think we were even quite aware that was what happened in Nightmare. You know what I mean? Like, you would just... Because, for all of the attention you guys have put into it, I was a fan of Nightmare. Like I say, I watched it every time it was on, from start to finish, and I never really knew what they were doing. I was just eating some peanuts, I just had my face pointing at the screen, enjoying myself. So to me, it was just about I guess they walk around in a cool castle or a dungeon or whatever it is, and there's some stuff there. I don't know, and I think that was the downfall. I think we all had a similar impression of Nightmare and hadn't really thought through what it actually is that happens.
These days, I really feel envious of people who can still feel that way about it, because it's so wonderful when you don't even have to try and suspend your disbelief. You can really get immersed in the game. I can't do that anymore. It just, the world has moved on too far for me to do that now. But I do miss that feeling of total immersion that you could get back. Certainly when in the first couple of seasons. After about season 5, I pretty much lost that.
Well, you'd have been about 25 by that point, wouldn't you?
How old do you bloody think I am?
You surprised me before. Didn't you say you were in high school when it was on?
I just started high school in 1987.
Right. So you would have been a teenager.
I was 17, I think it was, when season 5 was on. By that stage, though, you can see the cracks. Your brain has developed too far for you to be able to just ignore all the weaknesses the same way now.
No offense to the guy. To me, it started to fall apart when they brought in the who's the Marvin the Paranoid Android fella.
Pickle.
Yes, that's it. Yeah,
David Lerner.
No offense to David Lerner, but I didn't accept that as an addition to the show.
I agree 100%. Looking at the episodes, Danny's team started very well last episode. They started making mistakes more and more frequently as level 2 has gone on. I was rather shocked when they were killed off originally, because the mistake was so bewildering. But looking at it now, it's been coming since early in level 2, I think, and it hasn't been annoying. That the episode has moved reasonably smoothly. They've been a bit slow here and there, but you just feel it's not a surprise when the big bang happens.
Yes, I don't know if this is something that happens a lot in Nightmare, but I could sense a certain amount of backstage crew exasperation with this.
Do you think some of the surprise about what actually happens comes from the fact that back then we had to wait an entire week for an episode?
Yeah. I think there was a shock effect. It's literally about a minute into the next episode the death happens, so you're still getting settled in your seat.
You haven't opened your peanuts yet.
Precisely.
Right, so that's all we've got for this episode. Dave, have you got anything you want to plug at the moment?
Yeah, go on then. I've got a couple of podcasts of my own. Every 2 weeks we do one called Sonic the Comic the Podcast, which on the one hand is an issue-by-issue read-through of the British Sonic the Hedgehog comic, completely different from the American Archie ones, and starting from 1993, May of 1993, and moving onwards, we're heading towards 1995 now. And on the other hand, it's just a sort of time capsule to what it was like to be a kid in the UK in those days. We talk about Woolworths a lot. So that is Sonic the Comic the Podcast. You'll find it if you search for that, or stctp.wigglehe.com is where you'll find the episodes going up every other Friday. And I have another podcast called Serious Disness, in which we talk about Disney films, and so far we've almost exclusively talked about those weird, unnecessary, extremely mixed bag, but usually quite bad Disney remakes that they are insisting on doing right now, and seem to be in a bit of a death spiral towards the end of at the moment. So that is Serious Disness, although our first, I think it's 5 episodes, are just about Frozen. We managed to mine a lot of chat out of that film. I think anyone who's interested in the sort of animation of the time will find that sort of thing interesting. And when I say the time, I again mean the 90s. I don't know how that's true when we're talking about Frozen, but you'll see. And so that is Serious Disness. Again, seriousdisness.wigglehe.com. You'll find the episodes there, or just go looking for the thing. Also, I am on YouTube as Demon Tomato Dave. I'm on Twitch as Demon Tomato Dave. I'm on Twitter as Demon Tomato Dave.
So if you like the podcast, you can follow us on Twitter at NightmarePod, or you can email us at broomcupboardclub@gmail.com. And until next time, don't have nightmares.
Just watch them instead.
Ha ha! Dangly parts.